The ATF as we know it might be heading toward its final days. Some are calling it the biggest shakeup in decades for gun owners. In this video, we'll talk about how the agency's leadership and focus might change dramatically, why that matters for our liberties, and whether we're on the verge of a major victory for the Second Amendment or simply trading one problem for another. We've all watched the political scene shift under the current administration. During Trump's return to office, one of his first bold moves was to redirect key personnel at the ATF and the DEA away from targeting lawful gun owners. He rerouted agents who might otherwise spend time scrutinizing who purchased multiple handguns or analyzing compliance forms. In doing so, he gave the immigration enforcement apparatus a shot in the arm, pulling resources from federal agencies that had long loomed over firearms issues. When fewer agents are used for random inspections or for scanning multiple handgun purchases, law-abiding citizens naturally feel a bit of relief. It becomes less likely that we'll see enforcement overreach targeting routine transactions that the government has habitually scrutinized. But this reallocation isn't the only change afoot. Many of us heard the buzz that Kash Patel was tapped to lead the ATF. Patel seemed like he could become a permanent director, or at least maintain the acting role for a while, given his pro-2A reputation and closeness with Trump. Instead, he served briefly, barely a week before stepping aside. That left many of us asking the same question we asked when Dettelbach departed. Now what? Without Patel in that seat, does that mean a return to the usual brand of leadership we've come to expect from an agency that's never treated our community well? The big surprise has been the emergence of Dan O'Kelly, someone with deep ties to the ATF's past, but also a history of challenging the agency's worst instincts. He could very well become the next top official at an agency that, if reformed, might finally stop punishing law-abiding citizens for minor infractions and start focusing on actual criminals. O'Kelly spent more than 2 decades inside the ATF after having served as a police officer for 11 years. While many higher-ups in federal agencies spend their days behind desks, rarely venturing out into the field, O'Kelly immersed himself in the nuts and bolts of firearm technology. He studied how different components interact and how modern semi-automatics differ from older designs. He then became an expert witness and educator after leaving the ATF in 2011, founding gunlearn.com to bridge the gap between everyday citizens and complex firearm regulations. The fact that he has first-hand knowledge of the agency's methods and also a willingness to call out their flawed policies has given the pro-2A community a real sense of optimism. Before we dig deeper into how O'Kelly could transform the ATF, let me mention something important. If this video is helpful in any way, please like, share, subscribe, and click on the bell icon for more of these videos. Thanks for all your support. It really helps our channel and helps get the word out, especially when it comes to fighting for our rights. What makes O'Kelly's possible appointment so intriguing is the fact that we're not talking about a typical bureaucrat who simply parrots old narratives. He has taken on the ATF from the outside, offering testimony that exposed how the agency frequently misclassifies items as illegal firearms. One of the standout examples involves the seizure of thousands of polymer 80% lowers at a company called Ares Armor in San Diego. The ATF insisted these were legally classified as receivers, thus criminally chargeable if unregistered. O'Kelly appeared as an expert witness and argued they did not meet the legal definition of functional firearm parts. That stance shook the agency's claim to its core, leading to a large portion of seized items being returned. Moments like these reveal why many of us feel the ATF is in desperate need of an overhaul. For too long, we've watched as the agency shifts its own rules, redefines what counts as a firearm, or decides overnight that lawfully owned accessories are now contraband. This endless flip-flopping undermines our freedoms and leaves honest Americans wondering if they'll become accidental felons just for owning a piece of plastic or metal that the agency might reclassify on a whim. O'Kelly's record of pointing out those gray areas shows that he is interested in actual enforcement, not in trapping people who merely build or customize firearms for perfectly lawful reasons. At the same time, there's a bigger question we can't ignore. If the ATF is reined in, dissolved, or drastically downsized, what happens to its existing responsibilities? Some fear this could be a Trojan Horse scenario. That term applies to the possibility that, while the ATF might weaken, other powerful agencies like the FBI or the Department of Homeland Security could absorb the same functions. If that occurs, we could face a far greater threat down the line. The FBI and DHS have far-reaching surveillance capabilities, and they often take on matters labeled as domestic security risks. Under the wrong leadership, lawful firearm owners might find themselves in the crosshairs of agencies with even broader mandates. It's crucial that if the ATF is truly heading toward dissolution or a radical reduction in power, we ensure those powers aren't simply relocated to organizations capable of even more intrusive oversight. Anytime a government agency shrinks, the next administration can still revive or retool its functions. Look at what happened after September 11th with the Patriot Act. What started as targeted surveillance measures rapidly expanded into something that touched many aspects of everyday life. The risk here is that dissolving the ATF without completely removing or defining its enforcement roles could lead to a scenario in which a future anti-gun administration simply shuffles these tasks into an even larger bureaucratic behemoth. That is why we must remain vigilant and press for laws that limit how federal agencies can regulate or clamp down on firearms, so that whichever agency ends up handling these responsibilities can't simply recreate the same oppressive measures. Lest anyone doubt why the ATF has come under such heavy fire, let's recall some of its darkest chapters. The Waco siege of 1993 resulted in the deaths of many, and critics pointed to the agency's heavy-handed approach in the lead-up to the tragedy. Then there was Operation Fast and Furious, where agents oversaw the sale of firearms to Mexican cartels in the hope of tracking them, a plan that backfired disastrously and resulted in violent crimes and loss of life. More recently, the fiasco surrounding pistol braces showed how the ATF will retroactively decide a previously legal accessory is now illegal, effectively criminalizing thousands of lawful owners overnight. Such actions underscore why many of us view the ATF as the poster child for bureaucratic overreach. Meanwhile, the anti-gun lobby keeps pushing the narrative that the ATF is the only federal law enforcement entity that protects communities from violent crime. They try to sell a false idea that without an aggressive ATF, criminals would run wild. A quick reality check shows the agency employs a small fraction of federal agents compared to the FBI, DEA, and others. In fact, about 105,000 federal officers have arrest powers, and the ATF accounts for merely 2,597 of them. That's a tiny slice of the total, yet anti-gun groups cling to the claim that the agency somehow single-handedly saves the country from chaos. We see through that spin. The real reason those groups champion the ATF is that it has historically been their sharpest tool for infringing on our constitutional rights. By granting it expansive regulatory powers, they can stifle gun ownership through the back door, bypassing Congress and waiting for the ATF to declare new rules. Remember how the pistol brace ban was forced through, or how the agency redefined unfinished frames as complete receivers? These bureaucratic maneuvers aren't about stopping real criminals. They're about making it harder for ordinary citizens to exercise constitutionally protected freedoms. That's precisely why we view the current situation, whether it's a meltdown of the ATF's enforcement power or a pivot under new leadership, as a pivotal moment for gun rights. Let's circle back to Dan O'Kelly. His potential directorship represents a radical departure from the usual pattern of appointing anti-gun administrators who lack hands-on firearms expertise. He knows the law inside and out, and his experience allows him to see where the agency has historically twisted statutes. If he gets the nod, we might see the ATF shifted toward its rightful mission, focusing on actual criminals rather than law-abiding folks who happen to own certain types of rifles or accessories. Instead of the usual bureaucratic entanglements that tie up gun shop owners with random audits, resources could be directed at people committing violent crimes. That's something many of us have been demanding for years. Of course, not everyone is thrilled about O'Kelly. The anti-gun voices who depend on the ATF as their favorite tool for controlling firearms are likely preparing for a showdown. They'll try to block his appointment, citing his direct challenges to the agency's authority. In truth, he's not undermining the agency, but rather saving it from itself by calling for consistent application of the laws that already exist. Opponents will likely say he's too friendly with the Second Amendment community, or that his previous testimony in cases like the Aries armor seizure undermines ATF directives. We know they'll throw everything they have at him to maintain the old status quo. This political battle could be fierce. Congress has to confirm a director, and the forces opposed to genuine reform will do whatever they can to maintain an agency that has historically backed their agenda. On the other hand, there's a growing awareness across America that the ATF has been operating in a murky space for too long, with definitions and rules that even its own agents can't follow consistently. The popularity of online discussions about the agency's missteps has opened eyes beyond the usual Second Amendment advocates. People who aren't staunch gun rights defenders have begun asking why the ATF keeps shifting its positions and whether due process is being violated in the process. If O'Kelly isn't confirmed, we risk the possibility of someone far less sympathetic taking the helm. That could mean doubling down on misguided regulations and more crackdowns on small businesses or private hobbyists. We might be stuck watching as the agency attempts to further expand its purview, labeling common firearms or accessories in new ways that push them into legal gray areas. In that scenario, the Trojan Horse problem resurfaces. Someone else might carry out the exact same oppressive mandates or pass them along to a larger agency with even more sweeping powers. The best-case scenario is either a greatly diminished ATF or one led by someone genuinely committed to treating gun owners fairly. Some would argue for the ATF's total abolition, but until that becomes a reality, having a director who respects our rights is the next best outcome. If Dan O'Kelly does get confirmed, the shift may happen quickly, with the agency backing away from the usual petty rule changes and devoting more attention to major offenders who commit real crimes. Looking ahead, even if the ATF recedes in power or is led by a pro-2A guy like O'Kelly who genuinely gets it, the next administration could come along and reverse course. That's why the dissolution of the ATF, along with ironclad legislation preventing any other agency from seizing its regulatory domain, is the ultimate goal. If there's no longer a federal bureaucracy that can spontaneously decide certain firearm parts are illegal, we can stop worrying about overnight changes turning us into felons. A consistent set of rules based on actual laws rather than bureaucratic whims would be a huge leap forward. But as it is right now, this is just a pipe dream. So the big question right now is whether or not O'Kelly might quietly work to dismantle harmful elements of the ATF from within. He's hinted that the agency could function as a straightforward law enforcement group rather than a regulatory labyrinth. Punish the real criminals who commit murder, armed robbery, or acts of violence, but leave hobbyists, sport shooters, collectors, and everyone else who follows the law alone. Such a shift would restore credibility to an agency that has lacked it for far too long. I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether O'Kelly might bring about the transformation so many of us have been demanding. Is this a moment of genuine change, or just another bit of Washington drama that leads nowhere? Feel free to sound off in the comments. If this video was helpful in any way, please like, share, subscribe, and click on the bell icon for more of these videos. Thanks for watching and stay proud in defending our rights.